Hi guys, so we just finished yesterday chapter 21 from The Tiger Rising, and if you remember from our last chapter, it ended with Rob and Sistine talking about a prophetess, so someone who tells information, and we kind of compared it to someone who's holy because in the end, it said if God was going to talk through somebody, it made sense to Rob that he would pick Willie Mae. So that's how it ended. So now we're on chapter 22. You out in the woods with that girl again? His father asked as soon as Rob stepped into the room. Yes, sir, said Rob. Look over here, son. His father was standing by Rob's bed. Sir, said Rob. His heart sank. He knew what his father had found, the meat. He had hidden it under his bed until it was time to go and feed the tiger again. Where'd this meat come from? His father asked, pointing at the bloody brown bag. Without thinking, Rob said, Beauchamp. Beauchamp? His father repeated, low and dark. Beauchamp? He don't hardly pay me enough to get by. And now he giving us some rotten meat? He thinks I ain't man enough to put meat on my own table? Rob wanted to say something, but then he thought of Beauchamp and held his tongue. I gotta teach him a lesson, his father said. The cords in his neck stood out like twigs. So they're saying, the author's saying, I don't know if I can do it. It's like the veins and muscles, kind of. It's like if you clench your neck if you're Superman. That's what the author is saying for the cords in his neck. Stood out like little twigs. He kicked the meat bag. I oughta, he said, making me work for less than nothing. Giving us rotten meat. He went out and stood in front of the gun case. He didn't unlock it. He just stood and stared and cracked his knuckles. Daddy, said Rob. But he couldn't think of anything to say after. His mother had known how to calm his father. She would put her hand on his arm or say his name in a soft and reproachable voice, and that would be enough. But Rob didn't know how to do those things. He stood for a minute more, and then he walked over to his bed and grabbed a piece of wood and his knife. As he left the room, his father was still standing at the locked gun case, staring through the glass at the deer hunting rifle, as if he was trying to will the gun into his hands. Rob walked to the Kentucky Star sign. He sat down underneath it and leaned up against one of the cold, damp poles and started to work on the wood. But his head was too full of his father's anger and Sistine's tears. He just couldn't concentrate. He looked up at the dark underside of the sign and recalled lying on a blanket, staring up at a big oak tree. His mother had been on one side of him, and his father, asleep and snoring, had been on the other. He remembered that his mother had taken hold of his hand and pointed up at the sun shining through the leaves of the trees and said, Look, Rob, I have never in my life seen a prettier color of green. Ain't it perfect? Yes, ma'am, he said, staring at the leaves. It looks like the original green, the first one God ever thought up. His mother squeezed his hand hard. That's right, she said. The first one God ever thought up. The first ever green. You and me, we see the world the same. He concentrated on that green. He let it seep through a crack in his suitcase of not thoughts and fill up his head with color. So remember, his suitcase is his feelings. Whenever it says his suitcase and his thoughts, we're talking about his feelings. So a little bit is opening up. A little bit of his feelings are coming through. That's what filled up his head. He wondered if Willie Mae's cricket had been the same bright and original green. That's what he thought about as he carved. And so he wasn't surprised when he stopped and held the wood away from himself to see a wing and a beak and a tiny eye. It was Cricket, Willie Mae's cricket, coming to life under his knife. He worked on the bird for a long time, until it looked so real that he half expected it to break into a song. When he finally went back to the room, he found his father asleep in the recliner. The gun case was still locked, and the bag of meat was gone. He wouldn't be able to feed the tiger in the morning. He would have to wait until Beauchamp brought him another package. Rob went and stood over his father and stared down at him. He looked at his heavy hands and the bald spot on the nodding of his head. He was memorizing him and trying at the same time to understand him, to make sense out of him, out of his anger and his quiet, comparing it to the way he used to sing and smile when his father jerked awake. "Hey," he said. "Hey," Rob said back. "What time is it?" "I ain't sure," said Rob. "Late, I guess." His father sighed. "Go on and get me that leg medicine." Rob brought him the tube of medicine. Outside the motel room, the world creaked and sighed. The rain started in again, and his father's hands were gentle as he applied the ointment to Rob's legs. And that's the end of chapter 22. So not a lot happened in this chapter. We only found out that Rob's dad had found the meat that Rob hid under the bed, but Rob's dad doesn't know that it's for the tiger. And we found out that Rob is thinking a little bit more about his mother and Willie Mae, and he carved Willie Mae's bird, Cricket, with his wood, and Sistine wasn't in this chapter at all. So for your question today, I'd like you to answer this. Why do you think Rob's dad gets angry but then doesn't do anything about it? So for example, Rob's dad went to open up the rifle or the gun case to grab his rifle, but he didn't do it. He just stood there angrily he just said a bunch of words, but he didn't do anything about it. Why do you think Rob's dad is angry but just lets it build up and nothing happens? All right, that was chapter 22, and make sure you answer the question that I just asked at the end of this video. Why do you think Rob's dad is angry pretty much for anything? He gets angry but doesn't do anything about it.